Hello, this is Chris Ott, and this is part 19 in this series, What Meher Baba Really Taught. Here, I'm going to go into a sidetrack about where we are today in philosophy. We need to talk about this because I predicated this whole series on this this quote by Meher Baba that after 70 years from the time he dies, philosophers will come pay homage at his tomb. And he said that in 1958. He died in 69, so that puts that year about 16 years out from where we are in 2023. Now, that's kind of an odd thing to say because philosophers are not in the habit of visiting spiritual masters. Because philosophy is the discipline of analyzing things using logic and reason and arguments. Uses arguments. It doesn't use inspiration or revelation, let's say. And so, what would they be doing there? Why would they have any interest in Meher Baba? Well, before we can understand that, we have to know a little more about what philosophers are doing at the moment and why what Meher Baba has to say would have something to do with their concerns. All right? I hope I expressed that okay. So I have this here because I'm going to draw some charts. The first chart I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a layout what kind of philosophy we're talking about here. This is something I didn't used to know. Most people don't know this. There are a lot of forms of philosophy. Philosophy is always a disciplined form of pursuit of knowledge about things that are not just tangible, but intangible abstractions. Okay, and there's of course. Let's take the pie of all the schools of philosophy. So I can, let's see. And we can first divide it into, let's see, we'll call this Eastern and Western. And of course, what I'm always talking about, what I studied, is Western philosophy. But Western philosophy is, of course, we have ancient, medieval, modern, and postmodern. Those are the periods, historically. Well, of course, I studied a little bit of all of those. But in the contemporary, in the last 150 years, philosophy divided up into two essential branches. One is called continental, which is the kind that's done in Europe, meaning France and Germany, and it's very inspired by the work of Kant. Okay, and that includes existentialism and phenomenalism and phenomenology. That is not, although we covered that to some extent, it's not my emphasis. Continental philosophy. The other form is called analytic. And analytic philosophy is what I studied most, and I felt drawn to it too. It's mostly the philosophy of the English language world. So, England, Australia, New Zealand, United States, Canada. But also, I've heard Japan uses analytic philosophy. And maybe this has changed, but this is the way it was taught to me, 20 years ago. It seemed that it was all the English language countries. And it actually did begin as a movement, analytic philosophy. Began at the beginning of the 20th century at Cambridge in England. Two men essentially sort of began a rebellion. This is all described in my second book, briefly. Bertrand Russell and G.E. Moore. Together they began to rebel against previous ideas from the 19th century and earlier, and they formed analytic philosophy. Now, analytic philosophy is very tied to language. That's where you have analysis, and it's very math-like. It tries to use logic. It tries to be rigorous. It tries to define terms carefully. It tries to avoid ambiguity. It's the exact opposite, in a way, of somebody like Nietzsche, who was sort of writing from inspiration. This is all arguments, and there's a lot of A's and B's kind of logic strings in analytic philosophy. They literally write the logic out, so you got that right. And it has a lot of positive things about it. We could talk a lot about it because, but I feel that Baba's work is very conducive toward analytic philosophy. Some people would disagree and feel it be, they would describe it as Eastern, or they would say, oh, it's more like existentialism. I don't know, those aren't my areas. I would say it's quite precise, actually, or you can understand it that way. So that's what we're studying. Contemporary analytic philosophy. Okay. Now, let's see. Got this little boo-boo up here. So there are all kinds of branches of philosophy, or not schools of philosophy, but subjects. So you have social political philosophy. That's something that I'm interested in, but I'm not very good at it, and I don't talk about it. To study forms of government like communism and democracy and so forth. That's social political philosophy. And then there's philosophy almost anything, but there's actually philosophy of science, which studies what is included in science and what is pseudoscience, and how can you tell, and does science give real truth, and how do we know, things like that. That was an area that I was very interested in. And of course, logic itself is an area of philosophy, and I've talked about that quite a bit. But and then there's ethics. Ethics studies right and wrong and morals, and analyzes those. And then there is religious, philosophy of religion. And there is another area called philosophy of mind. And philosophy of mind is an area of metaphysics that discusses what thought is, and the relationship between things like thoughts and feelings, subjective qualities like pain and worry and dreams and so forth, those subjective qualities that we have inside us, with the physical world. So if those things have a physical cause, how does that physical cause work? How do we get dreams and emotions and pain and stuff out of physical brain states, say? Okay. I hope that was clear. But I'm going to make this problem real clear. This is called the mind-body problem. And it's the main problem of philosophy of mind. And it has been a problem that has been addressed either without giving it a name, the problem. It has been there since the beginning of philosophy. And that Aristotle and Plato dealt with it in their own way, each, without calling it the mind-body problem. Only later was it realized, wow, there's this problem that no one's really been able to solve, including Plato and Aristotle. Although they did sort of see it, and they did conceived of ideas to try to resolve it, but it didn't really ever go away. Today, in contemporary times, analytic philosophers, have become very clear about this problem and can describe it very easily. And I would say any philosopher, meaning anybody teaching philosophy today or writing, philosophy books knows about this, or it's not really, he understands the problem. And I've never personally known any, no, there are people that pretend to deny that they can see it, but they can. Okay, so they're called behaviorists, and that's why I was talking about behaviorists in my last part, 18. But I kind of did that without explaining where my thoughts were going. My thoughts were already going to this talk. All right, so I'm going to draw a picture, and to describe the problem. Let's see, we need to be over here. Okay, so let me turn my chair. Okay. This now we can call the biggest prevailing problem in metaphysics facing contemporary man. It's called the hard problem. It was called that by David Chalmers, and a philosopher who's very famous. And it's also been called intractable. It's unsolvable. There's people who speculate that we'll never solve it. There's some that say, give us another 100 years and we'll figure it out. Okay, so I'm going to describe it. You have, let's see, we're over here. Let's take a picture. Oh, that pen's not working very well. Take a picture of a person. Okay? And he's looking, there's his eye. And in here, he's got a brain. And you know, there was a time when we didn't think the brain was where we did our thinking. At the time of Plato, for instance, he believed it was just marrow, like inside your bones, inside your brain, and its purpose was to cool the blood. So, and they rather thought was in something more mysterious, which was called the mind gradually, or the psyche, or the soul. All different places thoughts have been placed in the history of philosophy. But today, contemporary scientists and analytic philosophers tend to be in full agreement that this all takes place somehow in here. Okay? I'm talking about subjective experience. So if I see the color red, well, however the light gets to my eyes and then up my optic nerve to my brain, the experience of red is something that happens, it is supposed, in here. Now, even before we had the theory of the brain as the seat of experience, we would have said it's in the mind, but we would have kind of been the same thing. We would draw like a mind somewhere and we'd put them in there, so that we figured our ideas and our sensations were in our mind. That's how we would have said it in the 1600s, say, and the 1700s. And today we say in our brain, but it's the same thing. It's in something where the thinking goes on. And then you obviously have a world out here where you have what we call real things or physical things, the physical world. Now let's say this person here, he's looking at a physical tree. Now this picture is exactly what was drawn on the chalkboard by my professor of philosophy of mind, Chris Hill, who's, last I looked, he's at Brown University. He's very famous. And so this person's looking out at this tree. And in his mind, in his brain, he sees the tree as a picture of a tree that he's experiencing. Okay? And the tree picture is made of the colors, and it's made of the shapes and all these things. But all those are, these are thought bubbles. You've probably seen them in comic books. They're going on in here. Okay? All right. So the experience of the tree that this person is having is occurring here. Obviously, the tree itself is not in here. Otherwise, the whole wide world would have to be in his skull. No, it's somehow out here. But he's not experiencing it directly. Rather, he is experiencing some kind of representation of it in here, okay? So we say experience is internal. We always say that. Whether we were talking about the mind, we meant in our mind. Today, in our brain, we still say in our brain. This is where the experience occurs. Well, if the experience of the tree occurs here, and the real tree is out here, well, there's a lot of questions that arise. If this is the theory that we have, that we live with, and we always essentially have, okay, had something like this. This is called the external tree, okay, and it's in the external world. Now, we don't just mean outside of our physical head, because we mean anything that's really physical is at the external world, in that it's external of our experience. We don't mean external of our head. We mean it's outside of our experience. So because it's outside of our experience, and it's supposed to be the source of our experience, or the object of our experience, and we have only some kind of representation of this, we never actually perceive this external world. And if we don't perceive it, how do we know, A, that it exists, and B, how do we know that this, if it does exist, how do we know that this and this are alike? Is that a good match? Is that a fair representation of what's outside us? Now, if this is made up of, for instance, the picture of it is made up entirely of color, well, if we're perceiving only color in our experience, normally we think of color as a quality of subjective experience that the brain produces. So how could there be color outside of us? Okay? Outside of a brain. Isn't there just supposedly in the theory just light? And light doesn't have color. Light's invisible, actually. So we have a problem. We have two worlds, and we have no way to compare them to make sure that one is a good representation of the other. And we don't even know if there is an external world. How do we know there's an external world? And I could give quotes by some of the most famous philosophers of history pointing out, asking that very question. They don't know the answer. And when Chris Hill drew this picture on the chalkboard, and it was the first time I saw the problem, he stood back and he just stared. And went, well, what do you do? How do you solve this? How do we even know how to begin? That's why they say, well, maybe in 100 years we keep thinking about it. So I could go into all the methods that have been tried to solve this problem, but they essentially fall into two basic schools. One is called idealism, and one is called materialism. And there's really, any school is going to be pretty well categorizable as one or the other, except Baba's, by the way, because we're going to get to that, because it's sort of the third way. But let me explain what the idealism is. The idealism is that there is no tree external. There is no external world. That was just sort of a theory that didn't work. There's no matter. There's no material world. There's only subjective experience. There's only the internal world. Well, the problem with that is that the whole world winds up being in your head. And how is it that the world doesn't seem that way? It doesn't, like when it doesn't seem like all my friends and everybody I know is just in my mind. Okay, that's called solipsism. So this all forms of this division that divide like this end up collapsing into solipsism. Okay, nobody can find a way that you're having this internal experience and I am. How is that? And yours is a little different than mine because you're standing on a different side of the tree, or you're closer or further from the tree. It becomes really complicated. How it is we all have experience of a tree. How does it get generated? There's really no answer for this. All the forms of idealism and eventually did fail when really examined, and they devolved into solipsism. Now the other way is, of course, materialism, which is the view that there really is a external world, even though we can't prove it, and we have no way to observe it. And really, even this theory doesn't even belong to science, because science is the inquiry based on observation, and this isn't based on observation. It's not even based on logic. There are two, I could go into that, but there are only two major forms of logic: induction and deduction. And you can neither induce the existence of this tree, nor can you deduce its existence from an argument. Therefore, it's baseless. But so it's outside of science, it's outside of logic. But that's in a way it's not really a theory, because what is this theory trying to explain? like this theory of this external world. Well, it's trying to explain our experience, in fairness. So that's the phenomenon that it's trying to be an explanation for. But it doesn't really explain our experience, because the question then arises, if this is the cause of my experience, how did it cause it? No one has an answer. That's why there's a mind-body problem. No one even has the beginning of an answer, how that does that. How does this happen? So we know that the brain has all this activity, electricity and chemical activity, but how that electricity and chemical activity turns into the experience of the tree, no one has even the beginning of a guess. Nothing. We just go, well, it somehow does, but we don't know yet how. So it doesn't really work. It's kind of, it's been written that the materialism is less of a theory and it's more programmatic. The program is to one day have a theory that can make this work. Now, there is a big other problem that haunts both of these ideas. The idealism that the world is in your head, and the world of the materialism, where everything's just physical. Oh, I should add that in materialism, everything is material. And because this experience is not material, it can't exist. Therefore, materialists eventually have to deny that they have conscious experience. Sounds strange, but that's what behaviorism is. This is shocking to learn, is that there are philosophers who supposedly think, who deny that they are having any conscious experience, because they have to deny consciousness, because consciousness isn't physical. So they have to deny that it occurs. Or, like, show me some consciousness, they would say. So they don't see it. So they say it just looks like there's consciousness, which is completely crazy, because if it looks like it, then you are admitting that you're having a conscious experience of what it looks like. Okay, but now let's go into this other problem. The other problem is ethical. Let's start with the solipsism. Let's say that there's a person over here and he's being waterboarded at Guantanamo Bay, which is even too horrible for me to even think about. But the white papers to justify this were written by behaviorists who don't believe in that you even have real pain. It only looks like it. It's unbelievable, but that's true. You can look it up. But anyway, we're going to talk about first the idealism, which is the opposite. If the guy that's suffering over here is really just in my head, then what difference does it make if he's suffering? He's just an illusion in my head. He's just a dream I'm having. So there's no empathy. Now let's look at the materialist view. The materialist view is that he can't possibly be really suffering because consciousness and suffering are not physical things, and therefore he can't possibly have them. Therefore I can go on doing that and I become a sociopath again. There's no empathy either way. Both of those systems, the fruit of both broad schools of philosophy is not caring about your fellow man. Now, how does Baba solve this problem? Well, Baba doesn't create the problem to begin with. He doesn't speculate about this other world. He also doesn't have a view that experience is in anything. See, there's the mistake that's been made from the beginning of time. From the beginning of time, no, from the beginning of philosophy, with Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, 2,500 years ago. It has always been described as experience being in us. And if the experience is in us, then its object, which we can't obviously see directly, has to be outside of us. So there's always been this since the beginning. But Baba doesn't have this in you. Your experience is in you. Rather, there's your experience. Now, and it's this in concept, sort of like the reification of this in metaphor as literally in something that creates some kind of literally outside also. So it's corollary. Its cause has to be external for its effect to be internal. But Baba doesn't start with this in and out thing. Baba is just describing experience. That's all Baba talks about is experience. So Baba does away with this whole dichotomy. He doesn't really do away that it never emerges. Instead, Baba describes a process, a evolution of experience. And that's what I've been trying to get at in my books and in my last talk, of describing what I mean by an evolution of perception. The world emerges not in this, but it is the imagination of the infinite intelligence. But that's not in the infinite intelligence, although Baba does use the word in, all souls are in the infinite intelligence. But that means it's just a limitation of knowledge. He doesn't literally mean in, because every soul is the infinite intelligence. So it's very different. We don't have little things and things and things. Like we have, they're all one. There's just one soul. There's only God is. There's only one soul. That soul is God, and that is the soul of every being that's searching for itself. It's God. Every being is God searching for himself. And the world is the result of this process of ways of perceiving. So instead of coming up with an occult entity, a theoretical external world as the cause of our experience, we don't do it that way. That's a very primitive, old-fashioned way. Instead, we posit a process of evolution, and none of this comes up. And this has never dawned on anybody. It would never, ever, ever, ever have dawned on me if I hadn't read Baba's writing before. And see, I was 40 when I even heard this problem. I was 40 years old. And I didn't immediately know what to do about it myself. But over the next couple of years, I realized, wait a minute, they're not looking for a process. They're looking for an occult object, a thing that they can't see as the cause, which will never work. Because if you're inventing a thing that you can't see as your cause, you'll never be able to observe how it causes anything, because you can't perceive it. So they've produced their own problem. Now with the idealists, they're producing their own problem because they think the thing is in the individual. So in the mind. But we have that we are all in the infinite intelligence. And it's the infinite intelligence that's really having this imagination. And it's not in anything because the imagination is nothing but imagination. It's just like if I lie down and I have a daydream on the couch. Is my daydream in me? Well, I guess a neurologist would think it's in my brain. But no, it's not really in me because it doesn't exist at all. It's only a daydream. This is what Baba basically, it's another thing that solves the problem, is that the world doesn't even really exist. So it doesn't need to be contained in anything. Okay, that's why when they get it, what they've overlooked, and then they go and look deeply at this process of evolving sanskaras, which are what they're the perceptual schemata that form the experiential world, the phenomenal world. It's going to blow their mind. It's going to blow their mind. Not just because it solves the most ancient and intractable problem of philosophy, of all schools of philosophy, but it has ethical, positive fruit because it turns out we're all one. Now, this isn't the kind of oneness that they have in like communism or something, or totalitarian. We're all going to march to one drum. There's just one, we're all going to unite. No, you can have your thoughts and I can have mine. The oneness isn't like that. We're not going to, we're not talking about equality like that, like I'm going to make everybody have the same amount of stuff. It's that everyone is everyone else. It's different. We're all God. And God, as I said, is benevolent, infinite intelligence. And so this isn't like another form of the New World Order where we're all going to, be the same. That's not what we're talking about at all. You can have unity in diversity. That means there's a room, everybody's different, everybody's unique, but they all have a sense of oneness. A little bit like that. That's what I think. That's what I think is going to be the fruit of discussions like this when the time comes for them to be had by people. And I hope these videos will be of some help. Anyway, that was a very tough little subject to try to cover. And, I'll take a look at it. If it's good enough, I'll put it online. But anyway, thank you for watching. The next one will be number 20. And take care. Bye-bye.